When I was 11, almost 12, the woman who lived in the apartment above us was a coke dealer. Yeah, you heard that right. It wasn't something you could ignore, but we mostly kept to ourselves. The night of my 12th birthday, something weird happened. She went missing. Like, completely disappeared. I would share the news links, but I don't want to break any rules. Anyway, it wasn't long after she vanished that her boyfriend started acting sketchy. One night, he came downstairs and knocked on our door, asking to use our phone. It was 2004, so cell phones weren't super common yet, and honestly, my mom had let him and my upstairs neighbor use our phone a bunch of times before. So, it didn't seem like a big deal. Only problem? My mom wasn't home. She was at work just 5 minutes away, and I was alone in the apartment. But I figured it was fine. What's the worst that could happen? So I let him in and brought him to the living room, which was toward the front of our apartment. He picks up the phone, dials a number, listens for a few seconds, then hangs up. Weird, right? But he does it again, and again. He's just sitting there, dialing and hanging up. Then, the front door to the building opened. Now, our building was small, like an old single-family house converted into apartments. You could hear everything, and that front door, it was heavy as hell. You always knew when someone came in. As soon as he heard the door, the boyfriend turned to me, put his finger to his lips, and whispered, "Don't tell anyone I'm here." Then he bolted, straight to my bedroom at the other end of the apartment. I just stood there, completely stunned, watching my bedroom door close. Not even a second later, there was a loud, hard knock on our door. Not just any knock. It was the kind of knock that had to be the cops. Sure enough, I opened the door, and there was a police officer standing there. "Is your neighbor's boyfriend here?" he asked. I was terrified. My voice was shaky as I stammered, "Yeah, he just went into my room." The officer nodded and asked if he could come inside. I let him in, and as he stepped in, he asked if I could also let his partner in through the back door and show them to my room. We walked together to the back of the apartment. The back door was right next to my bedroom door, but we had to circle around the kitchen table to get there. It was a tight space, just enough room for the table between the two doors without blocking the path. So I showed the officers to my room, and they opened the door. Next thing I knew, they were pulling my neighbor's boyfriend out of my bedroom closet. Yep, he was hiding in there like some kind of movie villain. They escorted him out of my room and toward the back door, which led to an enclosed fire escape. One of the officers told me to wait in the living room while they took him out the back. I did as they said, but my heart was pounding. Sitting in the living room, I couldn't hear their conversation outside, but I did hear the distinct sound of handcuffs clicking. That was the moment it really hit me. This guy had just been arrested, and he'd been hiding in my bedroom. I was terrified, but I stayed frozen until I heard the police car drive away. The second they were gone, I grabbed my keys, double-checked the back door was locked, and locked the front door behind me as I bolted out of the apartment. I ran straight to my mom's work. I'm not a runner. I've never been fast, but I swear I made that 5-minute trip in 2. Adrenaline and pure fear had taken over. I just needed to be with my mom. When I got there, I burst into tears and told her everything. She was pissed. Not at me, but at him. For using me. For hiding in a kid's bedroom closet to avoid the cops. That night, she gave me a short but firm talk. She told me that from now on, I wasn't to let anyone into the apartment to use the phone. Not even people we knew. Not unless she was home. Looking back, I still don't know what he was wanted for. And honestly, I don't want to know. What freaks me out the most is wondering whether he knew the cops were on their way and came to my apartment specifically to hide. Or if it was just a coincidence that he figured out it was the cops when he heard the front door open. Either way, the thought of what could have happened if the police hadn't shown up still makes my skin crawl. So this all started about a year ago. I'm 23, and I've lived on the second floor of the same apartment complex my entire life. The building is mostly families with young kids and married couples. Everyone knows each other really well, since a lot of us have lived here forever. There's only one unit that's a little different. Instead of a family, it's occupied by a pair of brothers who pretty much keep to themselves. Then, out of nowhere, one of their sons, who's about my age, shows up. And let me tell you, this guy was weird right from the start. He always wore a sweatshirt with the hood pulled up, like all the way over his face, and he would run through the complex to get to his apartment. I've never actually seen his face because of that hood. What made it even stranger was how he'd get into his place. Instead of using the door, he'd climb through the window. Every single time. It seemed like he went out of his way to avoid any interaction with anyone. Honestly, I didn't think much of it at first. I was super busy with school and barely saw him. But then, one day, he started sitting on the staircase that leads to my apartment. At first, I just thought it was strange. His apartment is on the other side of the complex, on the first floor. So why was he sitting there, right outside my place? I brushed it off at first, but then it started happening every single day. When I'd come home from school, he'd be there. If my boyfriend dropped me off late at night, like around 10:30 or 11, he'd be there. And it wasn't just that. There were times I'd leave for hours, and when I came back, he'd still be in the exact same spot, like he hadn't moved the entire time. At this point, I was creeped out enough to tell my parents and my boyfriend. They were immediately on high alert. After that, my boyfriend started parking his car and walking me to my door every night he dropped me off. And you know what? As soon as the guy saw my boyfriend, he stopped sitting on the staircase. I thought that was the end of it, but of course it wasn't. So, after the whole staircase thing, I thought it was over. But no. Instead, he started waiting for me at my bus stop. The bus I take from school stops right across the street from my apartment, so it's usually just a short walk home. One day, though, as I got off the bus, there he was, just standing there, waiting. The second he saw me, he started following me. He followed me all the way back into the complex, and guess where he went? Yep, straight to the staircase again. And it didn't stop there. He started following me when I'd take my dog out for walks, too. At this point, my parents were done. My mom went around and told the neighbors what was going on, and they started looking out for me. If I was walking alone, they'd make it a point to strike up a conversation with me until I was safely inside. Then one day, I get a friend request on Facebook from him. Here's the thing. This guy had never spoken a word to me. Not once. So how the hell did he even know my name, let alone find me on Facebook? My mom tried talking to his father, but every time she knocked on their door, no one would answer. I kept telling myself it couldn't possibly get any worse. He seemed weird, but harmless. Right? Wrong. One day, I came back from my boyfriend's house, and my mom sat me down. She said she had something to tell me, but didn't want me to freak out. Apparently, earlier that evening, she'd been walking toward the kitchen to get some water. The kitchen has this huge window that takes up most of the wall, and right outside is this big tree. If someone climbed that tree, they could easily see into our apartment. Well, guess who my mom saw up in that tree? Yep, him. He was sitting up there, looking straight into our apartment. She called my dad over, and the second my dad appeared, the guy jumped out of the tree and ran. Hearing this, I felt like all my peace had been ripped away. How long had he been watching us? Watching me? We immediately filed a police report, and when they checked the tree, they found snack wrappers and a blanket tucked between the branches. That wasn't the first time he'd been up there. I couldn't stop thinking about how many times he might have been watching me without me ever knowing. It's been about 6 months now, and I haven't seen him since. His father still lives in the complex, but the guy just disappeared. The police couldn't find him, and honestly, I hope I never see him again. This happened when I was around 9 years old. I'm 25 now, and I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. It's burned into my memory. To give you some context, I lived in a terraced house, one of those setups where 4 houses are connected, and each has its own little patio. My patio was separated from a small road by just a low fence. The road wasn't anything unusual. It's where people would take their Sunday walks or just pass by. It was all pretty normal. What wasn't normal? Seeing someone on my patio. Back then, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom came home from work. School was just a short walk away, so my mom figured I was old enough to handle being alone for that 1 hour. This one particular day, I got home, locked the front door like always, and double-checked the back door that led to the patio. I was a little scared of being alone, even though it was broad daylight, so I made sure everything was secure. Then, I rushed upstairs to my room to get in as much PlayStation as possible before my mom came home and made me do my homework. I was in the middle of a game when I heard this noise coming from outside my window. My room overlooked the patio and the road beyond it. It sounded like a cat meowing, and for a second, my heart jumped. My cat had been missing for 3 months, so I thought, could it be? Did he finally come back? I dropped my controller and ran downstairs, excited to check. But what I saw when I looked outside, it's something I'll never forget. There was a man standing on my patio. He was tall, with black hair that hung over half of his face, making him look like something straight out of a horror movie. He was making these high-pitched noises, like a cat meowing. And then I noticed the brown liquid dripping from his mouth. I froze. He was eating out of our ashtray. I could see him pulling out my dad's old, stomped-out cigarette butts, chewing on them, and spitting them out. He just stood there, meowing and eating cigarette stubs like it was the most normal thing in the world. I was too scared to move at first, just watching in disbelief. But then, I snapped out of it and screamed as loud as I could. He didn't even flinch. He just kept eating. That's when I bolted. I ran back upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and called my mom, sobbing. She told me to stay put and immediately called the police. I was shaking under my blankets, terrified, listening to those creepy, high-pitched noises echoing from the patio. The next thing I remember is hearing the police arrive. They were outside on the road, trying to talk to him. I could hear them yelling things like, "What are you doing?" and "Come over here, or we'll come down there and arrest you." But he didn't respond. The noises he was making just got louder and more frequent. Feeling a little braver now that the cops were there, I peeked out my window. I could see two officers, one man and one woman, standing by the fence. But I couldn't see the creepy guy because he was standing directly beneath my window, out of sight. Then, the cops jumped the fence, and that's when the screaming started. It was the loudest, most terrifying scream I've ever heard in my life. The man charged at the female officer with full force. He knocked her out cold. After the guy knocked out the female police officer, the male cop managed to wake her up. She looked like she was in rough shape, and I could hear him calling for backup and an ambulance. Then, he looked up and saw me watching everything unfold from my window. I must have looked absolutely terrified, because he just sighed and said, "I sure as hell hope you didn't see all that." That's when I lost it. I started crying. By this time, some of the neighbors had started gathering outside to figure out what was going on. One of them, a sweet elderly woman, saw me and brought me downstairs to sit with her while we waited for my mom to come home. She did her best to comfort me, but I was still so shaken up. The police eventually loaded the creepy guy into their car and left. But before they drove off, they assured us they'd come back to explain everything. Later that night, the male officer returned to sit down with me and my mom. That's when the story took a completely unexpected turn. He told us that the man from my patio had severe autism and had escaped from a facility for mentally challenged individuals about 5 kilometers away. And here's the kicker. The officer said the man had actually lived in our house about 5 years before we moved in. Apparently, he'd been forced to leave after his mom, his sole caretaker, passed away. The poor guy had been struggling to adjust ever since. The officer said the man probably returned to the house looking for his mom, trying to find a sense of familiarity and comfort. It broke my heart to hear that. The officer explained that the man was extremely strong due to his condition, which caused his muscles to grow unusually. That strength was why he'd reacted so violently when confronted by the police. He assured us they would do everything they could to make sure it never happened again. After a few sleepless nights, life eventually went back to normal. Years passed, and the man didn't come back. I tried to forget about the whole thing, but the memory always lingered in the back of my mind. Fast forward to about a year ago. By then, my parents had moved out, and I'd bought the house from them. It was a quiet morning, and I was enjoying my coffee on the patio when I noticed someone standing on the road by my fence. At first, I didn't think much of it. I gave the guy a quick nod, but then I heard it. The high-pitched noises. My heart sank. Holy shit, it's him. His hair was gray now, but those sounds made it unmistakably clear. It was the same man from all those years ago. My mind raced, and I immediately realized what had happened. He must have escaped the facility again. This time, though, I didn't panic. I just felt sorry for him. 16 years later, and he was still searching for his mom. I took a deep breath and carefully asked him if he wanted to come down to the patio. To my surprise, he instantly jumped the fence. I was a little nervous, remembering how strong he was, but he just smiled at me. I offered him a seat, and when he didn't respond, I invited him inside. That's when he started laughing. Not a menacing laugh, just pure, genuine happiness. We went inside, and his face lit up. He sat down on my couch, turned on the TV, and immediately switched to cartoons. It was like he was transported back to a time when everything was okay, back when he lived here with his mom. I watched him for a while, letting him enjoy the moment. Then I quietly called the facility to let them know he was with me. They arrived about 10 minutes later, and it took a lot of gentle coaxing to get him to leave. He was crying as they walked him out, and it broke my heart. A couple of days later, I called the facility. We came up with a plan. Now, every Sunday, Tom, yes, that's his name, comes to visit me with his caretakers to watch cartoons. It's the highlight of his week, and honestly, it's the highlight of mine too. Tom is my friend, and I wouldn't have it any other way.